Greeting Legacy family and friends. I pray that you're well, that God's grace and peace is on you this Thursday of Holy Week, a Thursday in which we commemorate, think of, ponder that Thursday in Jesus' life all those years ago. And there's so much that he said and did, so much took place during that Thursday that there's 100 sermons worth of material there from whence we can draw and benefit. Causes a little bit of anxiety when you think of all that we would leave out just to talk about one or 2 points. But I want to do that just today and put a couple of things out in front of us for us to meditate upon and grow from this Maundy Thursday. It was that Thursday when Jesus, among other things, sits at table with his disciples, and great teaching takes place and demonstrations of love and humility, of what true leadership and might look like when he washes their feet. But sitting at the table, he turns to them and he gives them a commandment. He calls it a new commandment when he says, love one another as I have loved you. And upon first hearing, it probably sounded very familiar, probably sounded anything but new. These were men who had been brought up hearing teaching in the synagogue or from their parents, from the Pentateuch, wherein is contained the commandment to love our neighbor as ourselves. And they hear Jesus, and probably their first reaction is, what's so new about this commandment? But a closer inspection of his words, maybe a couple seconds later, maybe it was years later, when they understood that he was commanding them to do something far beyond loving our neighbor as ourselves. Truly, we have a great deal of self-love, and if that were the measure of how we are to love and care for our neighbor, that would be a tall order in and of itself. But that's not the commandment. Jesus commands us to do something new. What's so new? He says, love your neighbor as I have loved you. Love my neighbor as I love myself, that's a stretch. But to love my neighbor the way Christ has loved me, that's a whole other thing, a thing for which I'm going to need help. And is always the case with the grace of God, God never requires of us that which he does not first provide. He gives us what we need to love our neighbors that way. It's that same evening that Jesus, after having taught and broken bread and given a whole new significance to a whole new kind of meal, he took the Passover and brought it into reality. All that it pointed ahead to was about to become their present and future reality, as by his blood he fulfills all that the old covenant and the feasts were pointing to. He gets up from that meal and heads to a garden and invites them to join him. And while they slept, he prayed. And he prayed to God a prayer that reveals his full humanity and his full divinity together in that place of anguish, for sure, as great drops as of blood began to seep from his pores for the anguish that had already begun. Not one nail had been driven, no thorns on his brow, but the anguish had already begun. His passion had already begun. The very thought of just thinking for a moment about being forsaken by the Father that others might be accepted, something that for all eternity he had never known, he was headed toward within just a matter of hours. But in his anguish, he makes a prayer that's already demonstrating a transcendent kind of love that he invites us into. When he says to the Father, not my will, but your will be done. In his humanity, he says, there's nothing about the pain that I look forward to. This is not just theater. It's very real pain. And I would, like any other human, like to avoid the pain and still achieve your goals. And so if there's any way for that to be possible, Lord, let it be. But if not, my higher petition, the thing I want more, is your will and not my own. In essence, what I want is not what I want. It's not a prayer we can make in and of ourselves. What I desire of you, God, is not what I desire for myself, but my first thoughts are of your glory and their good. And that's the kind of love that Jesus commands us to, but also empowers us for. Jesus knew that in just a little while he would go to a cross and through a tomb, and his spirit would be poured out into our hearts so that we would be enabled to not just be saved, not just be his own, not just be destined for glory, but we would also be in this life empowered to love in a way that reflects his love. He took the time on his last Thursday and some of his last hours to leave this commandment. Something we ought not take lightly, something we ought to embrace, something that he's enabled us to do. He's shown us an amazing love. He's enabled us to demonstrate glimpses of that love. And so, while it's true that maybe under the circumstances that we're living under at the moment, we're going to have to be super creative in the way we demonstrate that love, count on that same Holy Spirit that's shed abroad in our hearts because of what Jesus Christ has done, that will be granted the creativity, the opportunities, all the wherewithal that it takes to love the way we've been loved. That we draw from that bottomless well to love our neighbors, even beyond the way we love ourselves. And so, as you meditate on that today, this week, hopefully ongoingly, you wonder, you just stand in awe of the fact that we've been loved that way by that Messiah, having these eternal effects on us. Wonder, rejoice, just revel in that, but also stand in awe and move in action because of the fact that his love has enabled us to love that way. So how are you going to do that? How are you going to show that love? How are you going to live in love? That's a meditation. That's a conversation to have with God, to have with your family members, maybe to call a friend regarding. Let's not waste this pandemic. Let's come out on the other side of this. A pandemic that coincides with Holy Week. Let's come out on the other side of this, having garnered all that we could possibly get out of this situation for the glory of God. Love you. Can't wait to see you again. Can't wait to get together and break bread and take that cup and celebrate his work together again. But know this, that in the interim, we're praying for one another. We're caring for one another. We're loving one another in active and creative ways. God bless you. God be with you. Have a wonderful Holy Week.